All right, hello there. My name is Molly Anders, and I am the DevEx UK-based correspondent reporting now from London. And I'm so excited to kick off this conversation in partnership with Women Deliver in the lead up to the Women Deliver 2016 conference happening next month in Copenhagen. Attended by policymakers, development leaders, and others, the conference is the largest global convening that focuses on health, rights, and the well-being of girls and women. A special component of the Women Deliver conference is its incredible fleet of young leaders, and they absolutely are a fleet, who also attend and share their work as agents of change in their communities, working to transform policy, programming, and their communities for the better. Today, we have the chance to speak with two of Women Deliver's young leaders who are leading the way for more inclusive political spheres in Egypt and the Philippines. So first off, we have Inam Abul Soud, who is coming to us from Egypt today, from Cairo. And Inam was motivated in her youth by patriarchal structures in her community to question the nature of gender roles and violence from a very young age. She studied English and Italian at Ain Shams University in Cairo. And during that time, she volunteered with Better World, carrying out an awareness campaign against sexual harassment within the NGO. She also studied fertility and its social role in rural households while living in India. And after relocating to Cairo, Inam resumed her work as a freelance interpreter, working very closely with scholars and journalists on topics including sexual harassment and domestic violence. Since the Egyptian uprising, Inam became increasingly interested in social work and civil society. She began working for an NGO named Ittija, focusing on youth and development projects, including issuing national identity cards for women in 10 governorates and conducting training grassroots workers on sexual and reproductive health. Inam, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction.
Absolutely. And next we have Jonathan Moniz, who is with us from Manila in the Philippines, and it's quite late there, as I understand it, Manila, and he's just come from work. So we really appreciate you joining us, Jonathan. Jonathan is with the Bureau of International Health Cooperation in the Philippines, and he is a nurse by profession and a public health servant by heart. He's currently working as Senior Health Program Officer at the Bureau of International Health Cooperation in the Department of Health in the Philippines, where he is a liaison between the Department of Health and United Nations agencies. Jonathan has also assisted in organizing international events at global health diplomacy forums in the Philippines. And prior to joining the government, Nathan worked at an NGO on a policy advocacy and project that tracked the adolescent sexual and reproductive health provisions included in the then quite divisive National Reproductive Health Bill. He is also an active member of the Alliance of Young Nurse Leaders and Advocates to promote the Millennium Development Goals, particularly MDG 4, 5, and 6. Jonathan, I'm looking forward to also hearing you talk about the SDGs and how you feel these sectors are fitting in there. Great, thank you both for joining us today.
Molly, for the introduction.
Absolutely, yes. And so, we'll move right into it. Our first question, and as we've spoken about this a little bit before we went on air, this phrase meaningful youth participation is quite loaded, right? And it gets thrown around a lot, often by people who aren't actually youth and obviously want to have youth best interests at heart. So I'd love to just throw the question out there right now. What does meaningful youth participation look like to you? And maybe we can hear from either of you, and maybe we'll hear from Inam first.
Sure. So meaningful participation for me is not limited to having young people right at the policy, the policy making meetings, or to be present in governments, or to be represented in parliament. That's part of it, but what is most important for me personally is at least having the space as a young person where I can express my views securely and safely, whether that would be a virtual platform or in the public space generally. And at the same time, not just being able to express my views, but also to be heard, because sometimes you're under the impression that your opinion is valuable and someone really is giving you the ear for it, but at the same time, there are hundreds of incidents where people are talking and expressing their views, but no one is taking them into consideration. So I think for me is the three aspects of it to be present, like to be able to represent your age group or your background in official spheres, like in the parliament and ministries, and at the same time to be granted a secure, safe space, whether virtually or in public space, to express your views, and at the same time to be guaranteed they'll be taken seriously. So yeah, that would be for me what meaningful participation.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting, concept, the idea that there isn't necessarily a really substantive space for youth. And they've called youth the missing SDG in the new UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that is another instance where there isn't necessarily a youth-owned space. I think that's totally true. Jonathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree fully with Inam's thinking about the meaningful youth participation. And I think one of the important thing about meaningful youth participation is the creating enabling environment. Having young person or young people in the policy spaces or programs and implementation of it is just one step, um, but the most important thing is the creating an enabling environment where young people can freely engage in decision-making processes, in projects and programs, and where young people's ideas and recommendations are being valued. So that's like what Inam said. And one important thing is diversity, because it is not enough that there's only one representative. There are times that you need to get the thoughts of the of their other key populations. Like when we talk about reproductive health, you need to get the perspective of young mother, of LGBT, of people living with HIV when it comes to sexual health. So there are sometimes having just one representative is not enough, and that's one thing that the youth counterparts need to consider. And there are a lot of studies that show having young people in the group or in the policy discussion, it be, or in the projects decision making processes, it becomes responsive to the needs of young people. So so I think that's it.
Hmm. Excellent, absolutely. I think that's a great caveat too about diversity, about having diverse groups of youth as representatives as well. And
Wait, one thing.
Sure,
Sorry.
of course.
I just remember that there are a lot of complaints about millennials. We are the millennials, and the baby boomers and the generation Y or X. They think that yeah, that the millennials are the me generation. We are too narcissistic. We love selfie. We love to boast. We love to post in social media about ourselves. I think one important factor of meaningful youth participation is open-mindedness, where the adults have to understand the generation of the youth, and also, of course, the other way around, the youth have to also understand the adult counterparts. So it's a two-way process.
Hmm. I think that's a great point. Yeah, instead of making youth an enigma, that should be dissected and turned into clickbait, like what do millennials want from their workplace?
Yes.
What are the biggest trends in like millennial social media? Absolutely, there needs to be more sort of level understanding. I think that's a great point. Both great points here, and I think and in that vein, I think it's really sort of hard to bring to the fore, concrete examples of youth participation. And I think both of the contexts that you're coming from, especially, Jonathan, you working with the UN, obviously, and Inam being in Egypt, where we're, just coming out of the uprising there. I'd love to hear, what role are young people playing in your country's political landscape? And are there concrete examples that you can point to of positive youth participation in that political landscape? And yeah, I'd love to hear from Jonathan on this one first.
Okay, I think one of the advantages in the Philippines, we have progressive policies when it comes to meaningful youth participation in the political processes. At the national level, we have the National Youth Commission,
Mhm.
and then at the provincial level, we have the Provincial Youth Council. And then even at the village level, we have spaces where young people can join the governance, like the Sangguniang Kabataan or the Youth Council at the village or community level. And then conglomeration of it or the group of all the Sangguniang Kabataan is called the SK Federation um, in one province. So there are a lot of spaces where young people can join or can join the political processes in the Philippines. Of course, it's there are barriers, but I think that's a good start.
Mm. Definitely. I think
And,
getting those foundational organizations are important. Go on, sorry.
okay, um, and then now we have a young legislator. We we call it young if it is 40 years old and below. So we have one young senator who is also a commissioner, who was a commissioner of the National Youth Commission. So he was really a champion of young people. So Senator Bam Aquino. And we also have a party list called the Youth Party List or Kabataan Party List,
Mm.
which is a group of different student council organizations in the country and youth organizations. So somehow we are represented um, in the Philippine in the political arena.
Mm. Absolutely. Very interesting. And what about you? Obviously, Egypt is an important context to be including youth at the government level, even, and hearing those voices.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the demographics, but like 60% of the population is under 30 years of like their age is under 30 years.
Wow.
However, like if we look at the parliament that it just got formed last December 2015, the average age of a representative at the parliament is 53 years. And the youngest person that was actually listed by the government to join, because I think like there are around 18 parliamentary members that get hired or assigned as members by the government. One of them, the youngest, is 29 years old. She's a woman. But at the same time, it's not like, so the average for male members is 59 years, and for female members is 48. So given the demographics, it's not a really accurate representation of the young people population in Egypt. So I'm a little skeptical with youth political participation on a governmental level here, to be honest. That doesn't change the fact that the government has some increased effort compared to like the last 10 years in trying to engage young people in a lot of activities with the Ministry of Youth and Sports, for example, with like economic that last economic conference in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. But at the same time, it does not really like contain the anger coming from all the forced disappearances and unfair arrests and detention at the same time. So like it's hard to highlight the increasing engagement coming from the governmental side to engage young people in the processes of decision making, because on the other side there are like tremendous and overwhelming campaigns and raids of like arresting people on the street just with no record. Like as I'm speaking to you, I think it's gone on social media already that people are planning on rallies on the 25th of this month, protesting against the two islands in Sinai being put back into Saudi Arabia's borders. And that is a follow-up from last Friday. There were big rallies and 40 people got arrested. 26 of them is still under detention. And last night, 20 people got arrested just for sitting at a coffee shop, like really not doing anything. So like sometimes it's too overwhelming that you don't even have like time to reflect on what's happening and how you can be positively engaged, because like you're just collecting news from here and there and trying to stay safe at the same time. Because like really just being a young person in Egypt is not very like it's not safe sometimes, just by the fact that you're a young person.
Hmm. Interesting. So you're saying it's almost like the youth are an automatic target for suspicion just by virtue of being young.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. I mean, like, so Amnesty's last report in June 2015 covered a year of 41,000 unfair detentions and arrests of young people, like within 1 year, 41,000. Some of them are still in prison. So, so it's really overwhelming. And sometimes, if you have the energy and the inspiration and the passion to do something, like you're always held back because you're not really sure if this is the right thing to do now, like in this place. So sometimes you're just too overwhelmed or distracted by external events happening on the street. So even though there are some efforts again coming from the government side, trying to engage young people as per the SDGs and like youth participation thematic resolutions, uh, and that is pretty prevalent in all of the announcements coming from the government. But at the same time, you can't really stress them if you know that on the other side, it's not really what it looks like. So
Yeah. Interesting. Absolutely isn't what it looks like. On an economic level as well, I think youth unemployment is such an issue in both the Philippines and Egypt. I wonder
Yes.
to what extent do you all feel that on a day-to-day basis, as young people and in sort of the society, the sort of victimization that young people are on the wrong end of the economy at the moment?
yeah, so the uprising has become like the event to blame whenever anything bad happens. So like I think that the field that got most affected was tourism, and by extension it has affected like migration from coastal cities, for example, back to the capital, and that has caused more pressure, economic pressure, because like there are not enough jobs already, and like having people coming back to the capital is not making it any better. So it does have an economic repercussion, um, but like I don't have the figures for that. But like the last update I got on unemployment was 20%, but that was even before the price, and I'm pretty sure it's like way above that. But like not in figures.
Wow.
I don't have it in figures.
Sure, but we can definitely assume that they're quite high. I would think definitely.
Yeah.
Hello, Molly.
Hi, Jonathan. Yes, please go
Yes,
ahead.
I just want to emphasize that it's good that Inam and I are on the same session talking about the meaningful youth participation because we have different experiences here. While Inam's experience of uprising in Egypt, it talks about violence, really really nasty things about the government and actions on young people. In the Philippines, we have different experience here. I'm not saying that the meaningful that youth participation in the Philippines is perfect or it's at the higher level, but it's unlike in the Philippines that you can say, and that's the area where I am coming from. So I'm glad that to hear the story of Enam because in other side of the country that is not the case.
Hmm.
Uh, because here in the Philippines we will have our election on May 9, and one of the top presidential candidate is something that promotes violence, and young people love it. The millennials, I don't know, has a bandwagon on it, but they do not see the repercussion of violence, of having an authoritarian leadership on the country. That where violence is high, you see young people are really pushing something for reforms.
Hmm. Interesting. So you're
So
saying the candidate that is sort of more reform driven, or but this is also kind of a violent potential outcome. You're saying, but young
yes,
people are
yes,
supporting it.
young people are supporting it.
Mm.
Unfortunately, because they see that the democracy is not working in the
Mm.
Philippines. But what they only see is the corruption issues.
Mm.
But democracy is a good thing. But what they think is democracy brought us corruption. So they want a change in the ideologies, in the type of government system.
Absolutely, and that is an interesting phenomenon that, and this sort of is one of our questions, I think, about global conflicts and how youth that tend to play a role often in negative political participation, just because so many special challenges are faced by youth at times of political unrest. And it's interesting that there can be, as you said, Jonathan, like a misunderstanding in the political arena by youth, and often that frustration gets channeled into supporting the wrong candidate or supporting the wrong
Yes.
platform. I
Yeah,
wonder,
actually,
yeah. So go ahead, go ahead.
that's already democracy. That's freedom of speech that is promoted in the country.
Hmm.
But they don't see the importance of it because they believe that because of the democracy, there are a lot of criminals in the
Hmm.
street, or there are a lot of corrupt officials, or the what we call here as dynasty, because there are only a lot of businessmen and powerful families are making politics as as their business.
Hmm.
Sometimes even the retirement of some of the powerful businessmen in the countries. So they're tired of it. But I think they're seeing it from the different perspective.
Hmm.
So I think it's really alarming coming the new election, the election in May 9.
Hmm. Very interesting. Very interesting that misunderstanding could play such a role. And Nam, what about you and the way that youth are often, as you said, blamed in political contexts for violence, and yet they're often, I think, blamed wrongly or end up getting involved because of provocation from authority. Where do you see those problems having potential to be harnessed, or how are those problems unique to your context, to Egypt?
Well, in the last couple of years, I think it is the only promise, like not one of the promising e- energy coming out of young people is the like adopting entrepreneurship as a way out of like fighting, for example, unemployment, trying to bring innovation into a country that is predominantly run by like by really, I wouldn't say all, but like they're not actual representatives of the population and the demographic,
Mm.
as I've mentioned before. So I think like this is one of the things that you could that we can examine as a resistance in a meaningful way,
Mm.
and trying um, to reclaim a space that has not been granted for many of us. So you would see a lot of startups and yeah, a lot of startups and social enterprises that do address social issues, whether economically, socially, like the one that, like for example, the project that I worked on through my organization, trying to employ our knowledge and efforts to reach out for marginalized women, like 7,500 women in marginalized communities in 10 governorates, trying to issue them identity cards,
Mm.
and knowing that they couldn't issue themselves once because they could not commute to the places where they can get those identity cards issued.
Mm.
So we would go there and like do campaigns about like the political, economic, and social benefits of holding an identity card and proving like and and yes, and like exercising your right as a citizen of this country
Mm.
by holding one. So this is what we did, for example, in the first phase. And the second phase, we did issue them the IDs. So like we spent 1 year just talking about the importance of holding a national identity card. So that's what I mean, like trying to employ the efforts coming from the civil society organizations and also young people running their own business through startups to fill in the gaps. Because I think like things won't change overnight. And I don't see like any political transformation that would reflect on the country multi-sectorally without efforts coming from people in their positions. So I guess, yeah, in this context, that's one of the cheerful things happening around.
Well, I think that speaks too to this question of diversity, and is there a diverse enough group of youth represented? And you know, we can add to the need for representation from the LGBT community and from, as we've said, like it seems that geographic location also plays a role in that need for diversity, to be able to represent those rural populations. Jonathan, what were you going to say?
Pardon?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going to say something. Okay. Yes, I mean it seems like that keeps coming back here. This need for a more diverse understanding of what youth is, and making sure that those groups get represented. And I think we're also talking a little bit about barriers, right? So I mean, obviously, location is a huge barrier. We've talked about understanding being a barrier on the part of youth and on the part of the rest of the society. And what other barriers are you all encountering? Understanding, obviously, geography can be an issue. What other things are we dealing with and actually getting youth involved?
In the Philippines,
I think. Go ahead. Sorry, sorry, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. I'm sorry now. In the Philippines, when it comes to political participation, or partisan leadership and nepotism is really a barrier towards meaningful youth participation. It's because if you are not part of the party, if you- of the community leader, they will put you on the side. They will not give you any projects. They will not invite you in the meetings. They will. You are just you just got the name as the youth leader, but they will put you on the side. So it's nothing. And then another one is there is a connotation that if you become a youth council leader, the project that you need to do is about sports. So organizing basketballs, footballs, or any sports. But when it comes to the real issues of young people, education, health, employment, those things are not given to the youth, or they're not even invited to discuss this matter that are dearly to them. So that's one of the problems that we see here. Then another thing is the age bracket of the young people. I think is also another one. When joining the Sangguniang Kabataan, because that's only 15 to 17 um, years old. That's why they can easily be influenced by the adults. So those are the issues when it comes to political participation. So go ahead and
Thanks. I think like one of the barriers that we come across is usually when, for example, I talk to my mom about my work and she doesn't see the point of what I'm doing. Like, why would you knock on someone's door and talk to them about contraceptive methods, for example? Or she doesn't like. So there is this miscommunication passed over from one generation to another, I guess. That would be that would symbolize for me one of the barriers is generational gaps. It's not like always governments versus the people. It's also like people with among themselves, like not sometimes using the same language, and sometimes young people take for granted that everyone else understand their language. You know, like we have a great access to information and digital infographics from here and there, an exposure that our parents did not have, and even if they're trying to familiarize themselves with it now, does take like a great deal to be on the same page. So I guess coming from like I'm talking very personally here, but I think like seeing my mother now joining just Facebook because like she thinks it's cool, but like 2 years ago for her that was totally non-understandable, usage of time or like time spent. So so like seeing parents or older generations trying to cope up uh, with with us, and like if I may put it this way, is a great tip. But like there's a lot of work like to be done in order to communicate our ideas accurately to older generations, so that they see where we come from and not always just have the impression that we're a group of angry kids, like just always being stubborn. So.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of the tech side of it as being kind of a problem of translation. Like it is a language for us, and it's often seen as a barrier, I think, for other parts of the population to relate. So that is interesting that more could be done actually to bridge that gap from both sides, probably, right? The need to disconnect in some ways from tech in order to relate to the rest of the population. Also, I think, Jonathan, what you said about pigeonholing, and I think we see this all the time, youth getting in sort of positions of advocacy, getting stuck with sort of just the fourth side of it, or getting responsibilities, but only in issues where other people see that they're related to youth. And I think that's another one. That's really interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about like social media and tech, and how it's playing a role. So I want to ask both of you, what do you feel is the perceived impact of digital and social media revolutions, and how do you think it will dictate youth political participation going forward? And Anam, you mentioned Facebook already. Why don't you take that one?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't. I don't like always to think of, for example, 2011 uprising as like a social media revolution. But it was used as a tool, and it was a great tool for people to express their political views. But I don't think it was the trigger. Because that started. It has a background that started in 2005. To be more accurate on the historical background of the uprising. But it does definitely offer a space where you can see everything borderless. Like you can definitely know about all movements happening in the world, or like in Tunisia, for example, like to keep up with the news coming from there, which was not a thing before 2005, for example, here, or 2007. So I think it is a great tool if used properly, because it can also be misused to you can post anything you want on social media, and some people would believe it, even if it's not true. So, like, I think it's a great tool for advocacy as well, like, because it's like a zero budget campaign. It can be like you can go on and raise awareness on any given issue, and you can be guaranteed to reach a good number of people. But at the same time, it can be a little eliminated for other groups. So, for example, the beneficiaries that we work with through our projects, reproductive health projects and gender issues, for example, like most of them are not on social media. They don't even like have a phone or a mobile phone. So like it's a great tool, but I think it can just be working in parallel with like field work, because I can't see it as a tool that I can rely on 100%. But it's a great tool for advocacy, and at the same time to go viral with information, like globally, not just keeping it within its geographical boundaries.
Absolutely. So you think the most value that social media brings is in advocacy, rather than being any kind of, it maybe is sort of looked at as a cure for all in some cases, when maybe it's not necessarily.
It looked as what? Sorry, I didn't catch the.
Right, that you're saying that social media has a lot of use for advocacy, but maybe shouldn't be seen necessarily as a cure-all in any sort of movement, that we can't put too much weight or too much pressure on social media because it might not cure everything.
Yeah, I don't think it does. It was helpful during rallies to see where people are going, like from to where, like to just keep up with like demonstrations and things like this. But like at the same time, it's also a tool for now for arresting people. So like they would check your Facebook profile
Yes.
while you're in detention, and if they see you like posting anything political, they have more reasons to keep you. So like as much as it is a really good tool to express your political views, it can be used against you. So that's why I don't like to give it too much, like not to give it too much. Yeah, it's important. It's important, but like I don't want to be just having everything go around social media because like if it cracks down, then we're done. And it's more relevant to the work we do at the same time. Like women that we reach out for, they are not on social media. So
Definitely. It's important to be inclusive. I think, Jonathan, is that your experience as well? That you can't necessarily look to social media as being, this across the board, super tool.
Yeah, I think that I see social media as a beneficial tool for advocacy. Election is coming in the Philippines in 2 weeks' time, and a lot of young people are participating in political and electoral discussions through social media. It is also being used as a way or as a means um, to be socially aware, to be to show the inaction of the government, like us, like me being a government employee. If there are certain transactions that are dubious, some people are posting videos showing it, and so the government is doing or taking action about it. So it becomes a mean where you can air your concerns, but the problem is it is uncontrollable. Not like what Inam said, not all information put in the social media are correct or accurate. So but a lot of people are buying it even if it is not correct. So it is also our responsibility as youth to verify the information that we see in the social media before sharing it. So that's it. And I think one challenge with regard to the use of social media as an advocacy tool is translation of the social media hype into concrete actions. Like what we had in reproductive health advocacy when I was still part of the youth group that pushed for the reproductive health bill, but it's now a law. Um, we see a social media hype, but it does not translate into legislative and executive advocacy, where we need young people to sign up to join us to be part of the advocacy. There are a lot of people posting in the social media and then it stops there. But what we need is concrete action, so that we achieve something concrete. So that's one thing lacking sometimes when it comes to social media advocacy. And I think it's also a challenge, encouraging young people to really participate, not just in social media, but also in the streets if needed, or when it comes to dealing with the legislators and their public officials, etc.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in here quickly just to let our viewers know that we are taking questions and we can look out for those on social media, and you can tweet them at DevX, speaking of social media, at DevX, DVEX, or you can tweet them at me. I'm Molly, MOLLY, Anders _ Dev, DEV. And we're taking those questions now, and I think I can go ahead and say again that I am here with Inam Abul Soud, and she's with us from Cairo, and Jonathan Moniz, who's with us here from Manila. and we are talking about youth participation. And transitioning from this question of social media, and I think you're right, Jonathan, that one of the risks is that there is just so much content, right? And that youth are quite engaged in social media, and that often that doesn't necessarily translate into action or to concrete movements. And so I think it's easy for it to wash over potential advocates in these causes. I mean, and we've talked a little bit about youth, getting sort of swept up into negative political participation or even stereotyped into that group. And, I wonder if we can talk about how youth are currently moving in the political situation in your countries. Specifically, Jonathan, you mentioned the election coming up. And in Nam, you have these, as you said, these rallies, these demonstrations that could be a site of instability and potentially violence. What can we do for more productive participation in those instances, for example? And we can talk about those specifically or more broadly, how we're getting youth to approach those situations in a really positive and organized and productive way.
I often think that it's really essential to channel our anger like at repressive regimes or systems. So like yes, it's important to be angry and like to take the streets when it is necessary, but at the same time, like people for most of the time they really get stuck in this phase of reactionary, without like giving themselves the chance to reflect on how they can be like the agent of change for themselves. So like it's, even though it is becoming more of a mainstream mindset, like to start your own business, to do this and do that, but like it's much easier sometimes for others to just like like sit down and say like it's not my fault, like it's someone else's, and like blame like other bodies of that. So I think like I see it from both sides. Like I think the government can, or like governments or international community can just activate young people's role, not just by bringing them on panels and like to talk on this and that, but really just to make sure also they're heard, like that their opinions are valuable. It's the most relevant to our realities, since we're like the population of young people globally is I think is the highest. I don't know the figure by heart. Is the highest since years. So just governments and international community making sure that not only bringing young people to panels in decision-making meetings, but at the same time also valuing their opinions, and at the same time young people utilizing their position and their own energy by channeling that anger and through being the change makers themselves, like within their reach, like nothing really superficial, but just more of, I don't know, I see like volunteering is not in our culture, for example, volunteerism, and people often not think about how they can use their time better by just volunteering into maybe a political awareness campaign. This is non-existent, you see, so like it comes from both sides, I guess, and it can only be solved from both sides. So yeah.
Well said, yeah. It can only be sold from both sides. That's true. It's very much a two-way street. Jonathan, you have anything to add there? The situation in the Philippines is obviously heating up as you get closer to the election as well.
Yes, I think the positive political participation of young people depends on how enabling the environment is. If the government or the adults are not giving spaces for young people where they can freely say what they want, they can provide recommendations that they will hear their environment, their valuable suggestions, then it's the start of really the conflict between the adults and the youth. So I think it depends really on how on creating the environment for meaningful engagement. So that's one. And on the other hand, I think young people should use evidence. A lot of information that are inaccurate are circulating in the social media, in different platforms, in the media, etc. And young people need to learn how to use information and social media properly using evidence. Because if it is not evidence based, then um, sometimes we are very reactive to our emotion, but we forget that there are information that you need to know first before you react to something. So researching is one thing. Knowing the context of the situation, for instance, is also valuable.
Hmm. Absolutely, these are great points. We're running out of time here, but I hoped that we could talk a little bit more. You guys share a background and an interest in health and specifically reproductive rights, and I found that a really fascinating expertise to have, especially in this context of youth. So I wonder if you could both maybe quickly say something that you've learned specifically from your experience in global health and from your experience possibly with reproductive health as well about the value of youth participation. I know that's kind of off script, but I'll just throw it at you.
Yeah, well, I've been working for a year and a half on a project of transforming youth centers in three governorates into a decentralized place where young people can get accurate information on sexual and reproductive health. What we've noticed over the time that the interventions coming from like on a national level are not really effective, since we've been like for over 20 years now, for example, addressing FGM, addressing family planning, but still the percentage of victims affected by those um, ill practices are still on the rise. So we've been contemplating for the longest time like how we could resolve this, and we came up with there's no enough funds coming, for example, to dedicated for needs assessment, so that we see why the way we approach those communities it's not working. Like, so for example, home visits are not working. We've been doing this for 20 years in Egypt, I mean, and it's still on the rise. That means that the intervention is not really answering the needs. But at the same time, like, there's no one to fund this, like that would be willing just to fund the needs assessment to see what are the exact issues in those given communities, whether nationally or internationally. And at the same time, the government does overlook this. So like most of the time, you get funds and grants get into political participation in the heat of the uprising, but really ignoring persistent SRHR issues that have been around and been affecting women and girls in Egypt. So I think it's like one of the things that we've been really trying to brainstorm on, and it's one of the lessons that I've learned over the past year and a half.
Awesome, very cool. Jonathan, what about you?
I think it's just I just want to give a simple message, be it in the global arena, national, local. There's this simple formula when it comes to meaningful youth engagement. If it is not by and with the youth, it is not for the youth. So that's it, I think.
Definitely. Great message. We're getting a couple of questions now in from our viewers, and one of them is, and we talked a little bit about unemployment and youth underemployment, but what role do you think that youth unemployment and underemployment plays in youth engagement and political participation? We spoke a little bit about this specifically, but what do you think? Is it causing a malaise among youth or a disengagement, or do you feel like it's more often fueling negative participation?
I think it's more negative, yeah, if I'm allowed to speak now, I think it's more negative because like it's either really distracting because you're all the time preoccupied by how to earn a living and like how to survive generally. So if you're in a position, you have a good education and all the good assets that will make you a good candidate for any job, you get stuck in this trying to understand why you're not having a job, and like that would birth anger, and the anger can be translated into actions that would prolong uh, the dilemma. But at the same time, I think it can be used like with people who are not willing to, like as I said before, like to fill in those gaps. So it does affect political participation because like people become also cynical and skeptical of like what is democracy? Are we really doing anything? And so on and so forth. And on the other side, I guess it's just you get preoccupied by how to earn a living. In both scenarios, it's not really helpful to the political scene in any given context, I would say.
Definitely. I mean, if you can't afford, to care about what's happening in your political context, how can you be expected to engage, Definitely. Jonathan, anything to add there?
Actually, it happened to me when I was a newly graduate. So for 5 or 6 months, I didn't have any job, and my parents are pushing me to get one. But it was really hard because I passed the nursing board examination in 2008, and of course, my family wants me to get a job right after graduating in college. But the problem is, we have more than 90,000 passers. For instance, in one hospital, there's only one vacant position, but there are 500 applicants.
Wow.
So it was really depressing. It was really frustrating that, I don't know, that I think I am useless. My college degree is useless, and it's really frustrating in my part because I studied nursing for more than 4 years because even during summers we have our class, and then we need to attend 24-hour clinicals. So there's a lot of costs from my end, but in the end, it was really hard to get a job. One of the big issues among young people in the country is job mismatch and unemployment. There's a lot of unemployed young people in the country because a lot of us are taking up nursing, are taking up IT, are taking up hotel and restaurant management because most of us want to get job abroad. But the problem is we need to get an experience. But in the Philippines, but here we're having a hard time getting experience because there are only few available jobs or job opening. So it's really a frustrating issue, and it affects how the political participation of youth, and it has a lot of social costs.
Absolutely. I think it's hard to be engaged when you don't feel like you're a part of the economy, like that you're not driving your country forward. It's one of the greatest ways to be engaged as a young person and feeling like you have a career and a future. Absolutely. That's a really interesting barrier and a really complex one. So I think we've gone way over our time here, and I'm getting some notes about signing off. But I want to say thank you again to both of our guests here, Inam Abul Sood, who's here from the organization Ijtaha, and Jonathan Monas, who is at the Bureau of International Health Cooperation in the Philippines. Jonathan, Inam, thank you so much for joining us. It's such an engaging conversation and such great thoughts from both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Molly.
Thank you, guys. And we'll sign off. I'm Molly Anders, the UK correspondent. Keep the questions coming. Let's keep this conversation going. And tweet at us at DevX for other conversations and suggestions. And please stay tuned for more on Women Deliver in the run-up to the conference. Thanks again, and everybody take care.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Bye.